I'm a very organized composer. I come in at the same time every single day. I come in between 8 o'clock and 8:30. I usually have a half an hour break, and then I work till anything from 5 to 7, depending on the schedule. And I never work Saturdays and Sundays if I can help it. So I'm very, very disciplined.
I like to treat it sort of like it's my work, and I get up in the morning, I get the kids off to school, and then I go upstairs to my writing room, and that's what I do, and I'm there till 5:30, and then I'm done. That's a time where I can kind of just think about what I was working on, or experience other things and maybe get new inspirations or new ideas.
I think part of the thing about writing a film, which has got a lot of music in, you know, and it's not unusual now for sort of big action films to have like 90 to 100 minutes of music in, which is, you know, it's a lot of dots. Your first couple of weeks when you're writing that, you kind of set the template for what it is that you're making, and you try and do something which feels a little bit different each time. But as you go further and further in, you realise that that's the language of the film, and to a certain extent it becomes a little bit simpler the later you get into the process, because you're not going to try and do something completely different at minute 85 than you've been doing for the first 84 minutes. But the big pressure when you're doing those kinds of films with that amount of music is just the amount you have to churn out in a day. You know, anything from sort of 2 to 5 minutes of music sometimes, you know, and that's not always the best way to be doing it. It's a little bit of a scramble. But then when you get to the theatre and you watch the thing, and you realise that, oh, there are loads of explosions or helicopters, and you can't hear it anyway, you know. So that's the other thing you have to think about, knowing when not to write.
Your first film, Birdman. Actually, let's talk about how you got involved in it, because it's such a unique approach to including a score in a film.
When Alejandro approached me, you know, I just love his movies. I love Alejandro. I don't know any of the directors personally or anything. Music and film is something I never pursued because I have a very fulfilling career as a jazz musician, and you know, it was never on my radar. I love movies and I love music, and I love Alejandro. So when he approached me about the idea of having just drums, I was like, if you want just drums in your movie, I'm your man. That's for sure. And it's interesting because the way everything started evolving, it was all so natural and organic and very effortless. You know, of course, when he approached me about it, I was elated and petrified at the same time, because elated, man, to have a chance to work with them on a film with, you know, the cast that it has, and you know, it was just an amazing dream to begin with. But also, like, not too many points of reference, what I could do, you know, how I could approach this project. But I thought, if he thinks it's gonna work, it's probably gonna be cool. And my first instinct was to try to write very organized, you know, rhythmic patterns for the main characters, or for different scenes. And I sent him the demos, and he was like, you know, that's exactly the opposite of what I want. I'm like, so what do you want? Like, man, I want something really organic, spur of the moment, almost like I want it to sound improvised. You're a jazz musician, I want you to play jazz. I'm like, so that's easy, you know, because that's what I do every day, you know, on stage. So that's how it got started. I mean, it's been a crazy ride.
Music is usually the one thing that a director can't do. You know, they could probably shoot the film. You know, they could probably edit the film. A lot of them can and do. I've worked with directors who have been the cinematographer as well. You know, they're in the cutting room. They're sitting on the shoulder of the editor. You know, there's not much of the process of filmmaking that most directors couldn't do in terms of sort of key things, or could make a hefty stab at least. But music is that thing that terrifies them a lot, because it's a language that is so specific and so removed from the practical point of lenses and lights, and you know, like how many lights do we need in here? What's the aperture? What's our stop? What's our focal length? You know, these things are sort of physical things, and I know there's a huge amount of creativity goes into making those things work beautifully. But music appears to be, to a lot of directors, something which is quite terrifying. They can't really put their finger on specifics, like like you could with a bit of production design. You know, I always find that directors work most effectively with me when they talk purely in emotional terms, and some of them speak to you in emotional terms, some of them speak to you very specifically about instruments, and some of them don't speak to you at all. And to a greater extent, I like it when they don't really speak to me at all. I mean, obviously, you need to know what the film needs. But if they're at that point where they say, "Do you know what? I'd like to hear what you've got to add to it and what you're bringing to it," and some directors do, and those are the ones that I tend to work with quite a lot. Obviously, they have an opinion, and obviously they'll say something. But if they talk to me in emotional terms, I find that far more effective in terms of how I would respond to it. And it's interesting that you say that about the way that you work with Birdman. I know David Lynch does the same thing. He walks through a scene with the composer, and they write stuff as he speaks to them, and they become the bedrock of what the score should be. But that impressionistic approach to a film, I think, is one of the most important things that you can do, because I think what music should be doing in a film is to abstractly represent the film away from the film. So if you hear it, somehow you feel what that film is. You get an understanding of the kind of heat and the ferocity and the rhythm and the colour of it. And I've found over the years I've changed the way that I've worked. I used to work starting from the front of the film, working through to the end, scoring out each scene. But if you're scoring a scene, that's a very specific kind of mechanical job of making music fit someone moving from into a door over there, walking, stopping, talking over there, getting hit by something and then leaving. I mean, those moments that you have to punctuate and get out of the way of for dialogue. There's a mechanical part of composition which is dealing with the structure of the music, but ultimately it's the music is the most important thing. And now I kind of take a similar approach. It's like I'll watch a film, I might watch it once or twice and then not look at it for 2 weeks and walk around with it internally, not necessarily at a piano, not necessarily at a guitar or whatever it is that we're using, but somehow letting it sink in, and then you come up with an impression, your filter of the film's emotional core through what you're doing, and then you start coming up with ideas, and then now I write ideas like in little 2 or 3 minute suites, and won't fit the picture. It's not designed to fit the picture, but hopefully if you play it to someone, they say, I can hear the film somehow in that.
The advice I would give to someone who's just starting out relates to that finding your passion statement. I was lucky enough to find out at a relatively young age what I really love to do, and in this case for me it was music and sound. And in finding that, I found the thing that I would go home every night, if I had a day job or whatever, I would go home every night to my studio and create music and sound, just because I had to. It was burning a hole in my belly. And so I tell people, you need to want it that much, that you would do it anyway, that you would do it if you had no job, you'd still do it. If you had to pay, because it's a student film maybe that you're scoring, or a student video game, like you would have these days, you would just do it for free or even pay to do it. You might have to pay the musicians out of your own pocket. If you, as a person getting started out, can hear me say all that and say, yes, that's me, I can do that, I'll stay glued to it, then you probably have a chance. If you get to do what you love, there's just nothing better. I mean, there's no better way to enjoy your passion and to contribute and to leave something in this world better than you found it, leave some art behind, leave some beautiful music, whatever it is. Technology is a double-edged sword, because the fact that we could now play 100, 200, 300, 1,000 sounds at once isn't necessarily a good thing. One of the reasons people to this day still love the music from the oldest video games, Mario or what have you, is because the technology was so limited, they had to make the melody count with only one note playing at a time, or maybe 2 or 4. So the melodies had to be good and be memorable. And so, again, using music as an example, the best music would sound just as powerful on a music box as it would with a symphony orchestra. So a lot of what we're doing these days is making sure that we don't just use the technology for its own sake. I think one of the big frontiers ahead is simulating what mixers do when they dub a movie. They have every voice, every sound effect, every piece of music on a different volume control or fader. And scene by scene, they decide what's important and what moves the story forward and turn off the rest. So I think it's both a boon and a challenge that we can play all the sounds we want. It's all very clean, but now the challenge is to use great responsibility to not overdo it.
You know, look, the thing I've learned over the years is that there's a shorthand for composers and for musicians where they go, the strings, the brass, etc. It's not that, it's individuals that make up that string section, and you do want to go and pick your individual players because they bring, you know, they bring something to the party. I mean, they literally bring something to the party. You know,
you're like, very loyal, aren't you? To I mean, so many of the musicians that work with you in the studio, particularly in Air Studios, they're the same musicians that have worked with you for years and years and years.
Yes, I mean, well, actually, was it Inception? Yeah, it was Inception. We had a problem, a huge problem. We had booked our sessions at Air and we couldn't go because remember when the volcano blew up in Iceland?
Oh yeah.
Right. So we'd booked these sessions and we could have gotten there, but I said to Chris, what if the volcano blows again, we can't get back? So we had rigged up this whole thing, loads of cameras at Air and loads of microphones, and actually I could hit the talkback button in my studio in LA and talk to them. But we really quickly noticed that if we hadn't known these musicians, it wouldn't have worked because you hear the sound of Mary Scully saying something, you know it's Mary asking the question. You have
bass.
You know, and yeah, and they are our collaborators. They are our family. I mean, you know, it's why are we loyal to them? Because they've been loyal to us. I mean, they give, you know, we've put them through some difficult times. Trust me, Dunkirk is not for the faint of heart.